For sure. Makes sense.
Yeah, and then let's dive into the actual patch notes after that.
All right.
And speaking of things that take a little bit longer, Highlander.
Hey,
So the
there it
Highlander
is.
rework is finally in.
Yes.
It took a little bit longer than we expected. We ran into some issues redoing it, but it's we're okay, Max. So we're good to go. But honestly, like we're really happy with where we ended up with this. So I'll go over the changes just to be clear. These are the changes from current live to new live next week.
Okay.
So it's like there's stuff that was in the testing grounds, like a bit of how we're working through it.
So if they've never played the testing grounds,
Exactly. This was going to be happening to Highlander.
Yeah.
So first up, we have offensive form entry changes. So by that, we mean like how you enter offensive form and what ends up happening. So there's three kind of major changes. The first is that you can now enter offensive form after any feint by holding the heavy attack button. So what this means is you go neutral, you tap heavy to throw your heavy, you feint it, and then you hold heavy either before the feint or during the feint, and you will immediately transition to offensive stance, right? This gives Highlander a lot more options to get into it. It really helps you that you actually throw an indicator, right? So you don't know if you're able to parry what's going to be able to happen there. It makes it trickier to interrupt, makes it trickier to like it actually makes even the Highlander's head neutral heavies better because you're kind of a bit more worried about what's going to be happening. So that's the one big major change we have there. Yeah. The second line refers to it's fast flow to offensive form during offensive form side dodges. That's a mouthful. It's now from 6 to 800 ms. It used to be 4 to 6. Mm-hmm. This is the infamous wave dash. And so I don't want to skirt around it, right? We've removed wave dashing from the hero, at least at the time that we had before, mainly because it was a bug. Right? It was unintended from day one, but we left it in because it's one of those things of a bug that became a feature because it ended up being necessary under some situations. Enemies like spamming attacks really quick. And because he didn't have a proper dodge attack out of the side dodge, he could kick, but you didn't really get iframes, you didn't really get anything. So it became really, really difficult to deal with opponents that were mashing a lot of attacks. So now that Highlander does have a dodge attack, spoiler alert, in offensive form, this is no longer strictly needed. I know some players are not going to be super psyched, super happy about it. It's obscure tech, requires like trickier inputs. But at the end of the day, it's something that we've been looking to fix for a while. We had bugs relating to this like a long time ago, like infinite kicks and all sort of stuff. So it's better that it's not there for the hero's health, for playing against them. And you're going to get a dodge attack, which actually is even better than wave dashing, because then you're going to be able to do a lot of cool stuff with your dodge attack. So that's great. Yep. And then the last one here is you can now dodge earlier while you enter offensive form. So what this refers to is when you're entering from neutral, right? And even from feints, but more effectively from neutral, if you hold heavy and you go into your offensive stance, you can dodge way earlier than you could before. I don't have the exact number right now on paper, I'm sorry, but you can see it, it's in the patch notes. But the idea here is that if you were facing a Highlander and you saw him enter offensive stance, you could very reliably interrupt them and throw out a light, and there was nothing they could do about it. Yeah. With this timing for the dodge, now you have to make a read as to if they're going to dodge or not and what's going to end up happening, because it's much harder to interrupt them. You can like go into offensive stuff form, really, really dodge super quick, and you'll be able to dodge out of an interrupt attempt and then beat them with your dodge attack and get into this. So it's a bit of a quality of life change here to help him get into that mode a little bit safer. Yeah. Now we have offensive form changes themselves. Biggest one is kick can now be feinted. So that's great. So kick and caber toss have been changed a little bit here. But the idea is that when you're facing a Highlander, if you see them kick, you can just roll away. On live right now, just roll away. There's literally nothing Highlander can do. The best you could hope for is kind of like they would miss their roll input. So what we've done here is you can feint the kick, and now you can also do caber toss from front dodge when you are in offensive form. We also gave that caber toss a little bit more forward movement. It's a little bit faster when you use it from front dodge as well to be able to reliably catch rolls. So these two changes by themselves fix the roll issue. That's great. And then the feint also fixes on kick, also fixes the issue that Highlander has where right now, because everybody has a dodge attack, the kick, soft feint, the caber toss only works on opponents that are empty dodging. Yeah. If they dodge, if you do a dodge attack, your caber toss is going to miss them, we've tried to, we've figured out maybe we can give them armor, but then it's a bash that armored that you can it removes options from players. So instead of having that as a feint, you can feint your kick, parry whatever is going to come at your way, or dodge into guard break, do whatever you want. But it works a lot better. It's a lot more effective. You can feint the guard break as well if you'd like.
Yeah.
So it's really about giving Highlander better mix-ups in here. That being said, you can still kick the caber toss if you want to. Like one of the big things that we've been trying to do in this rework is keep a lot of what was making Highlander. We've experimented with like some weird tech where like from neutral you can just hold heavy and then you wouldn't charge immediately to make like some things a little bit easier. But then the more we're playing with it, the less Highlander it felt.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of where we're trying to go with this rework is keeping the feeling. We know players love Highlander because I love Highlander like really, really much.
Right.
And so even though we're fixing some things, we're trying to adjust these things so it works better. As I mentioned earlier as well, we have a new side dodge attack, right? In offensive form, it's 14 damage, 600 MS. You side dodge, release heavy. You're going to do a side dodge attack. If you played in the testing grounds, you saw the animation for that attack was the same one that we have in defensive form.
Yeah.
But we've actually changed it and we made a new attack that is in the same direction as a dodge, whereas we're normally your opposite direction. So it's a little bit different. But we have a brand new attack, so that's great.
Nice.
Props to Vanessa and the animation team for putting that in.
Yeah.
Amazing looking stuff. We also have the top light attack is now 400 MS down from 5. That was a very recurring feedback that we got where why would top not be 4 when the sides are 4 as well? So this is a nice little buffer under there as well. All 3 lights in offensive form or 400 MS. Super hard. It's unreactable from neutral. Very, very strong. Little range though, so you got to be right in their face, but it's still very useful.
Yeah.
And then finally, the heavy attacks in offensive form now deal 26 damage down from 30. The damage curve was a bit high. You get to land more kicks, more caber tosses, more of those things. So we need to lower that damage a little bit because otherwise it was just, again, way too strong. So it makes a big difference here. Another thing that's not in this slide here, but that kind of makes a difference is that the offensive form heavies cost 12 stamina now instead of 24. So it makes a big difference here. You can use them quite a bit more as well.
Okay, nice.
Next up, we have defensive form changes, which is quite a small slide. I think
There's a lot.
I'm thinking about it, could probably cut it in more, and then the 3-slide challenge would have been beaten here. So that would be. So
it's a real challenge we use.
I don't know. That's what I hear. That's what I saw on Twitch anyway.
Okay.
So right now, like some of the things we've been doing on defensive form is that the light opener superior blocks they now deal 18 damage instead of 20. Again, damage curve changes. Some of these attacks dealt too much damage, so we tried to mess around with them. Another big change is that the top heavies, actually the heavy openers have different speeds. They all used to be 1000 MS, which is really slow, but their armor, you're like, okay. But it prevented Highlander from having viable guard break and light parry punishes specifically. So now top heavy is 800, deals a regular 24 damage. Side heavies are 900 and they deal 27. So essentially, you get a guard break, you can get a top heavy for now for 24 instead of having to throw your zone attack. When you get a light parry punish, you get your side heavies at 27, which is one more than the unblockables as well in offensive form. So you don't really need to go into offensive form to get that extra damage. Again, it's one of those things where the input comfort of parrying, holding heavy, releasing it, like it just adds extra input complexity that is not really necessary for the hero. And even here, you're going to land it, you're going to go into offensive form. You're happy, you're good to go.
Yeah.
So that kind of works all around with giving him better options out of defensive form, lets him flow better into offensive form, get him a lot more normal punishes that we have on pretty much every other hero by now. So it makes a big difference here. The other change we've done is that chained lights no longer have uninterruptible stance. Highlander has, used to have at least, chain lights, kind of like Finisher is.
Yeah.
That had armor the whole way.
Right.
That was kind of oppressive. It was making people kind of annoyed. We've moved that uninterruptible stance. Jeez, I'm going to have a hard time saying that. We've moved it somewhere else, but it was no longer necessary on chain lights, really. So we just took it out of them. They're still good. They're still pretty fast. There's still a lot of good stuff there, but they don't really need that armor there. That's the thing. Then we have heavy finishers. We fixed a little bug where the guard break vulnerability used to be 200 MS on the chain finishers. Now it's 100, so we're good to go. But the big change with that and with zone attack is that they both chain into each other now. So if you throw a heavy finisher, whether it lands, hits, or is blocked, you can immediately go into zone attack. And then your third hit of zone attack can immediately go into heavy finishers. So you can keep looping those. You're a complete monster in the lane now because you have this big 360 arc going 3 times into a heavy, into the zone. It's like big spinny top guy goes broom. It's kind of cool.
Spin to win.
Yeah,
Here we go.
but it's super interesting. It gives them like a really different flow. But again, it feels really well, especially because you can now feint the first hit of the zone attack, and it gains uninterruptible stance. I got it right at 500 ms for the first hit. Then the second and third hit now have uninterruptible stance at 100 ms. So again, you get armor in various stages throughout the entire zone attack. But it really lets you trade with opponents, lets you stay into that that big attack going. Fits really well with defensive form as well, so that's great.
Nice.
Like I said, a third hit can go into heavy finishers, and we've also adjusted all the weapon trajectories for the zone attack to fit the weapon a little bit better. If you've played testing grounds, there was some instances where like sometimes they used to phase through people.
Yeah.
So we've really adjusted this so it would really hit a lot more 360 around him and be a lot more efficient there.
Nice.
That's it for defensive form changes.
Oh,
Finally, we have, quality of life changes. So, kick and kibber toss no longer drain stamina. We've been moving away from stamina draining bashes, so that kind of makes sense there. You can also now feint Celtic Curse, which is this front dodge heavy attack in defensive form. Before you could kind of like, you had to go into like the side soft feints, or you had to like hold heavy to go into offensive form. But you can now just straight up feint it and you're good to go. So that's like nice little quality of change there. Lets people mix up a little bit better. You can bait parries or whatever. That's good. And then we've also increased his movement speed to be the same as Kensei, so that rotations are better. They're more stable. It doesn't sound like much, but it was a big problem on Highlander. That was one of the big things that made him not really viable at higher levels because you couldn't rotate from B to A or C properly. It took too long. You had to pick rush as a first feat so you could actually go towards and run towards those sides. So it was like a bit annoying here, so we've really standardized this so he runs at a normal speed, like the same as Kensei. So it's not fast, right? It's not, it's not Shinobi, but it still is faster than it was before. So it really is more equal to what we have with other heroes.
Gotcha.
That's pretty much it for Highlander.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah, that's a.
But
that's
then,
a lot.
So then.
Oh yes.
Remember when we had the first title update? There was a little bit of a trailer, and we saw some things in it.
I do. Some eagle-eyed viewers out there.
Right?
Kind of caught on to that right.
A couple of them, right? So what we've been doing, it's not a major rework to Warden, right? Don't get your hopes up. This is what's happening to Warden. But what we've done is we've given him new follow-ups to Shoulder Bash. Max, you can play the video, and then I'll explain as we go. So essentially what we've done is on left and right light attacks after Shoulder Bash, and then on all the heavies, and as well as on zone attack, we've given them all, and Top Light also does it, but all these attacks that are listed here have brand new animations. We took the opportunity there as well to make sure we did more half sorting stuff. I know it's a big request from the community to have half sorting attacks. I see Brian in the
Brian's
back,
dancing in the background,
going nuts. So that's great. So we've adjusted this, but at the same time, we wanted to keep Warden playing the same. So it's the same inputs. Everything's kind of the same. The damage is the same. Recoveries, timings, everything is the same. It's just different visuals. Because we wanted to make sure that because these have uninterruptible stance, they need to be different than the attacks from neutral. Because it's not always clear otherwise. Are you throwing your neutral one? Are you throwing the one after Shoulder Bash? Yeah. Did I mistime it and the wrong one came out? And why didn't I get armor here and there? So it's kind of like it's a whole package here for this. And the reason why we did this, which is also quite important, right, is Warden has a bit of an issue in group fights where you couldn't really throw Shoulder Bash because you would get peeled constantly, very quickly. So with this, you actually are a lot more solid. You're basically immune to like non-bash peels. So it makes the hero much stronger. In 1v1, it has literally no effect, but that's okay. It's really specifically for group fights and making sure you're going to be good because you don't chain on miss. Won't really affect like if you dodge attack him, if you go into a guard break, still happens. Everything's still good there. But really, it's the focus on his group fight ability. It's the change that we're doing now for Warden. We're trying to figure out what else we're going to be able to do to make his group fight a little bit better. But that's like step one, right? It's one of those things that we're trying to go like a little bit more like step by step instead of trying to go everything all at once and see where heroes end up. that was very, very successful with Warlord in the past, as an example, where we did small incremental buffs almost every patch, and we got somewhere. I'm not saying there's going to be new buffs coming to Warden next patch, but it's just it's an approach we're trying to take a little bit sometimes where we do like it incrementally and see where things end up and readjust to get the heroes where they kind of need to be in a better position.
Right. Cool.
So that's it for Warden.
Very nice.
Then we have another slide, right? So
there's more slides?
There's more than another slide here. Which is a bit of a nerf to some heroes, but let's talk about it. Backstep attacks, right? So you can no longer backstep your light openers with these heroes. So Warlord, Valk, Kyoshin, Ephira, BP, Varangian, and Highlander. So you're looking at them like, that's a weird, eclectic group of heroes.
It's very eclectic.
It's very eclectic, right? Yeah. Besides a bunch of them having shields, right? The idea here is these are all superior block opener lights, also known as crushing counters.
Right.
Warden is not in here because he already could not backstep his top light. So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But the thing here is that we've removed the ability to backstep. So even if you're holding like down, you're holding back and trying to walk when you're pressing light, you will just not walk backwards. It'll be as if you're walking forward or being neutral. You're still going to be going forward. And so the reason why we're doing this is this was a very, very potent option select against opponents. Because what you could do with a lot of these heroes, especially like with heroes like Kyoshin or Ephira even, you can just like hold back and then you see red, tap light. If it's a light, you'll crush and counter them, you'll beat them, good to go. If it's a heavy, you'll backstep far enough that the heavy is going to miss you, that things can miss you, and it made you way too safe for this. We're only focusing on these heroes for now. We'll see how this affects other heroes, how this affects other things. I know Shinobi has some issues here where you can backstep your light into like skipping to your offense. So we'll have to see if we do this on more heroes, if we do this on more attacks. But at least now for the superior block ones, also known as crushing counters, it's a very nice change. It affects Highlander too. That's kind of part of why we were pushing this at the same time as the Highlander rework to make sure that things were going to come in line with this. So it's a big thing here. It's important. It's a request we've been getting from a lot of players for a long time to kind of at least nerf these attacks. To be clear as well, we've actually tried, I've tried myself like quite a bit to go, can we keep the backstep, but then not it be as bad and end up being worse because you would end up throwing unparable attacks instead, which is something that we really, really don't want to have. Yeah, no. So the more I was messing with them, the more it was either like we remove backstep, and yeah, it's it's a bit sad because you don't have that extra movement, but it created way worse issues. It would either you would become unparable or you would lose range completely on your lights, so you wouldn't really step forward. So there was a lot of like other effects that it created. So it's the simpler and the better solution is just remove backstep and we're good to go.
Nice. Okay.
All right.
Cool.
Then we have other changes that are a bit smaller on a couple of different heroes, but it's nerfs to some of the overperforming heroes. It's a first step here, again, just to make sure things are clear, but let's go through them. So Shinobi is light openers now deal 10 instead of 12. It was something that we had tried to do in the past. Something happened. There was a mistake somewhere in integration or whatever, and it didn't go through. So now it's actually through. We've tested it. Everything's great. So they actually do deal 10 damage. Okay. Again, damage curve was a bit too high. You can do double lights with it. Bit too strong. So with this, like it evens out a damage curve, so we're good. And then the second hit of the zone attack is now dealing 4 instead of 6. It's undodgeable when you dodge the first hit. It's a bit problematic. Okay. So by lowering it just a tad, it helps like ease the pain here a little bit for that issue. Yeah. Then we have Hito. So Hito has been like creeping up like quite a bit in tier lists. Yeah. I've been seeing like a bunch of different tier lists where Hito is a lot higher. And one of the major reasons for this is we discovered that the guard break vulnerability of her opener heavies, if you didn't charge them at all, was 333 MS. Normally, the magic number is 433. And the reason why it's 433 is that if I go and I throw a heavy at you, and I feint, and I guard break, and I read that you were going to try to parry, my guard break will always land. No matter what timing you feint, I feinted, no matter when you pressed heavy, if it were going to parry in the right timing, my guard break's always going to land. At 333, there's moments where the guard break will bounce. And so if you're fighting Hitokiri, Hito was super safe at throwing heavies at specific timings and parry windows where feint the guard break would just bounce off of her and she would get her heavies anyway. So what we've done here is the way Hitokiri is built is there's like when you start an attack, there's a charge portion and then there's a strike portion. And so the guard vulnerability applies only to the strike portion that we spoke about. Like you're vulnerable to guard break throughout the entire charge, but when you release the button, you used to have 33 ms of guard break vulnerability. Now you have 133. Okay. So you charge for 300 minimum, then you go into 133 when you release. So it gives you a minimum of 433, which is, again, like I said, our magic number for this. Yeah. So it's less of a nerf and more of a bug fix. This happened when we cut down the attack speed to 700 ms. Right. And then like a mistake happened that where we didn't readjust that window because we have to do all these things manually. Some people think, we have spaghetti code, but it's, we do have to do stuff manually.
It's more of a fine pasta.
Exactly, right?
Not just
angel hair or something.
Angel
hair,
yeah.
So this is kind of how it works. So we kind of fixed this so that Hitokiri should at least respect the rules in that regard. So that should be good. And then we have Ephira. So top red moon and right red moon, which are the attacks after her bashes. So after the neutral bash, after her kick, they now deal 16 instead of 18. And the reason why we're like, again, you're like, it's 2 damage, like whatever, right? It's because these attacks are guaranteed after a heavy parry.
Gotcha.
Right? You heavy parry, go into a neutral bash, go into those attacks. 18 damage is a tad too high for heavy parry punishes. We don't want to have that. There's a reason why we're trying to move away from higher damage heavy parry punishes. Often, it's not fun to play against. She still has her displacement that still deals a lot of damage. But if there's no walls around or anything, in most cases, you're going to be doing one of these two. And 18 is too high. 16 is higher than the baseline. Normally, baseline is a light, which is about 14-ish damage. The problem is that you have to spend extra stamina for your bash. And so we're kind of comfortable going, well, look, you know what? I had to pay the stam cost for the bash. I have to pay the stam cost for the heavy afterwards. So we're okay leaving them a little bit higher, but not at 18 where it's just way above the curve.
Gotcha.
And then finally, we have Orochi and Zerk. So Orochi is on attack, now deals 11 damage instead of 14. Again, changes to like some of these things that can combo into like that combo light, all that sort of stuff, so that the damage curve is more equal to everything else that we have in Orochi. Saturday finishers now deal 28 instead of 30. Big change here. They're still 700 ms. They still have very, very large hitboxes, trajectories. It's really about making sure that they're not overly oppressive. We'll keep an eye on them. It's been popping up more and more and more and more that they're like difficult. They're really strong.
Yeah.
So we're gonna see if we need to adjust them further. But for now, at least the damage is gonna be a little bit lower, and we'll see. And then finally, Storm Rush now deals 17 damage, down from 20. It used to deal 16, but then you had a guaranteed light afterwards that dealt an extra 4, so it was 20 total. When we removed that light, we were like, well, we don't want to nerf Storm Rush too much. So we kept it at 20. Like we raised it to 20 total. Right. But then 20 total is still too high. Like after all the data we've had, after everything we've been seeing, 20 is too high. Lowering it to 17, much more in line with that sort of attack. You're going to have to use it a little bit more if you want to be able to kill somebody with it. That's good. Gotcha. And then finally, Zerk. So Zerk loses a bit of damage at a bunch of different spots. Sometimes it goes on by 1. Sometimes it goes on by 2. But essentially, it's the more damaging attacks that Berserker has, we're lowering them. So top heavy opener deals 28 instead of 29. That was a bit too high at 29. Top heavy finisher deals 30 instead of 31. Again, you can it's easy to go into those attacks. So we don't want them to have overly high damage. Side heavy finishers, they're 32. They're above the regular limit of 30. But basically it's because they're tricky to get to. So at 32, we're like, yeah, it's still a bit high, but we're okay. And then side dodge lights now deal 13 instead of 15. That is also because his side dodge lights are very, very strong. Big trajectories, can be dodge canceled, have undodgeable, lots of movement. Yeah. So we're lowering their damage a little bit, again, seeing where that goes. And so that's kind of like the idea here, right? So we took some of the overperforming heroes, trying to level them down a little bit with through damage, and trying to see where that's going to go, see how much of an impact it's going to have. Yeah. We'd like to take smaller steps forward to get into a position where we're comfortable, then massively over-nerfing, right? Nuking a hero sometimes, it's sometimes...
Not always fun, yeah.
It is sometimes necessary, right? Yeah. Unfortunately, because things are way too complicated. It's... And it's not about spaghetti code or whatever, but they're a whole, and then you pull on one part and then everything else collapses. So we have to be really, really careful. Right. Sometimes you have to do this for things to stop being frustrating. Sometimes you don't. In these cases, we didn't have to do it yet, and we'll see where these things end up.
Okay.
That's pretty much it for balancing. That's quite a few slides this time.
That's quite a bit. Quite a bit. That was a lot. But thank you so much, JC, for coming on and sharing all that. As always, for these very in-depth explanations. I always really appreciate that. I know our community does too, to really just understand the rhyme and the reason behind it all. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and all the changes. And again, great job to the team out there who is working on these changes as well. So listen, community, all these changes, everything we talked about, if you missed any of this, we're going to have a patch notes, that'll be posted online for you to go through. You can read it all. Don't forget about eco mode as well. And all this will be save the trees, not going to go on the next one. Anyway, so eco mode, all the fun patch notes, lots of stuff to look forward to next week, 1 week from today, April 25th. Keep an eye out for all that. Check the patch notes. And don't go anywhere because we've got a fun wrap-up outro coming up right after this. So,
always
JC,
fun.
thank
Always
you so
fun.
much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Stick around. Don't go nowhere.